Welcome back to Lion Recaps. Today I will explain episodes 7 and 8 of the series The Good Doctor, released in 2017. We begin the episode with Dr. Shawn staring at some brand new TVs on his way to work. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Dr. Aaron comes by to see Dr. Claire to see how she's doing. Dr. Claire says she's dealing with her pain by getting back to work, but he insists she go for grief counseling. Dr. Neil arrives at the ER with Dr. Lim, where they meet a patient with a broken pacemaker. Dr. Shawn says the patient cannot have a transplant due to his age, so he will inevitably die. Dr. Kalu suggests cardiac synchronization in order to make the patient feel better for the few months he has left. Claire is ordered to cut the patient's jugular, but hesitates. Dr. Neil asks what's wrong, and she lies that she drank too much coffee. Dr. Shawn notices the EMS bringing in a wounded young autistic patient, and they strap him down. He's autistic and doesn't like being touched. Dr. Shawn cleans him up, and the patient learns Dr. Shawn is like him. The patient's name is Liam, and he wants his hands released, so when his parents arrive, they release his hands. Liam's mother is shocked that Dr. Shawn is his doctor because of his autism. His father asks if they can take him home, but Dr. Shawn says he shouldn't. Dr. Kalu tells his patient, Glenn, that a pacemaker is being flown in, and that they will prep him for surgery when it arrives. Dr. Shawn explains Liam's condition to Dr. Neil, and Dr. Neil instructs him to do an RCP to clear him, but Dr. Shawn disagrees. As Dr. Claire is filling out a psych questionnaire at the nurse's station, Dr. Shawn interrupts her and asks if she can help him with the RCP since she's good with autistic patients. Dr. Kalu returns to Glenn's room and realizes Glenn is missing. Claire gives Liam the sedative, and he has a respiratory reaction to it, but Dr. Shawn can calm him. As Dr. Claire proceeds with the test, she asks if Dr. Shawn is happy to interact with an autistic person, but Dr. Shawn doesn't feel that way. They're interrupted when they realize the patient has a lot of scarring in his digestive system. Dr. Shawn reports Liam's scarring to Dr. Neil. They cannot do an MRI or give him a sedative because Liam could die, but Dr. Shawn eventually convinces Dr. Neil that they should do an MRI. Dr. Aaron finds Dr. Shawn pacing the floor of Liam's room. Dr. Shawn wants a $1,643 TV, but Dr. Aaron reminds him that he's not a surgeon yet, but only a surgical resident, and his paycheck cannot afford it. Dr. Kalu learns Glenn got onto the freight elevator, but there were no cameras in the elevators, and some of the floors that the freight elevator goes to also lacked cameras. Dr. Claire is on the elevator when she gets a text from Dr. Aaron reminding her about her appointment for noon. As she's about to respond, Dr. Kalu gets on the elevator and lies that he's looking for a pediatric patient's blanket, but Dr. Claire knows why he's there. Liam is placed in the MRI, where Dr. Shawn helps him concentrate. Liam responds to Dr. Shawn as they attempt to start the test. It's going well. Liam suddenly begins to panic and hits his head. He's pulled out of the MRI immediately. Dr. Kalu searches the basement for Glenn. He finds Glenn, who reveals he broke his pacemaker on purpose in order to die. He asks Dr. Kalu to leave, but Dr. Kalu stays instead. Since there's no other option, Dr. Neil gets Liam's parents to sign the papers for Liam's surgery. Dr. Kalu is waiting for Glenn to pass out so he can get him upstairs before he dies. Glenn says he has already lived, married, and loved. Now he's alone with no home. Dr. Kalu talks about being sent to boarding school and later abandoned by his parents. Dr. Claire tries to calm Liam down, and Dr. Shawn begins to speak to him. Dr. Shawn discovers the cause of the scarring in his bowels. Liam's mother thanks Dr. Shawn for diagnosing their son, but doesn't want Dr. Shawn in the surgery. Dr. Aaron tells Dr. Neil that if he cannot convince Liam's parents that Dr. Shawn can handle surgery, he needs to tell them to find another hospital. Dr. Kalu continues to talk to Glenn, but Glenn has no response. He checks Glenn's pulse, but Glenn says he's still alive and wants to know what happened with Dr. Kalu's parents. He assures Glenn that he isn't alone, and Glenn expresses his gratitude for Dr. Kalu's help. Dr. Claire goes to her counseling session but lies about her emotions and state of mind. Dr. Neil meets with Liam's parents, who are worried that Dr. Shawn won't be able to help Liam. But Dr. Neil assures them that he has complete confidence in Dr. Shawn. The parents still refuse until Liam says he wants Dr. Shawn. Glenn's pacemaker arrives, and Dr. Kalu tells him he will return when he's ready to put it in. Glenn admits his wife left him and states that Dr. Kalu didn't deserve what happened to him. Dr. Kalu smiles and holds his hand briefly. Dr. Mohan, the counselor Dr. Claire is seeing, is concerned and advises her against suppressing her feelings as they will eat her up. Dr. Kalu returns to Glenn's room, but Glenn is gone again, and Dr. Kalu searches for him once again. Dr. Shawn arrives in Liam's room, but as he expresses gratitude, Liam's pressure is bottoming out, and he is going into septic shock. Dr. Neil offers the scalpel to Dr. Shawn, who takes it and performs the incision. This reminds him of his brother's toy scalpel. Glenn's location is announced, and Dr. Kalu rushes off. Meanwhile, Dr. Shawn cannot move as he has found the perforated spot. He wraps his hands around it, and Dr. Neil orders Dr. Claire to slowly cut it open so he can extract the septic contents and flush it with antibiotics. Dr. Kalu finds Glenn on the roof. He plans to commit suicide. Dr. Kalu once again sits beside him, but Glenn tells Dr. Kalu to leave as he cannot help him. Dr. Kalu refuses to give up on him. Dr. Shawn and Dr. Neil assure Liam's parents he will be fine. Liam's mother hugs him, and she quickly apologizes. He says she shouldn't feel bad, as they love him and did what was best for him. He makes a joke, and Dr. Neil smiles. Dr. Kalu sits with Glenn, who signed a DNR. He gives Glenn a morphine dose to help with the pain, and Glenn thanks Dr. Kalu as he dies. In the locker room, Dr. Kalu walks in and tells Claire about his patient, and Claire opens up about her suppressed feelings about the death of Jenna. Liam's parents watch over him. Dr. Shawn tells Liam that he will walk around in 2 weeks when the antibiotics have cleared his infection. Dr. Shawn smiles as he sees Liam and his parents together. Dr. Aaron and Dr. Shawn watch football as Dr. Aaron teaches Dr. Shawn about online banking and budgeting. Dr. Shawn wants to go to the Super Bowl, and Dr. Aaron suggests they should both go. Suddenly, the salesman informs them that it's almost closing time, and Dr. Shawn tells him he wants to purchase a TV. The salesman allows them to stay, and they recline their chairs and chill out. The next day, Dr. Shawn's neighbor, Leah, comes over to his apartment, complaining about their landlord as Dr. Shawn prepares for his day. She takes a bite of his apple, which he carefully selected, before storming out, offended that Dr. Shawn didn't support her position on the landlord matter. Dr. Shawn stops at a market to replace his apple, but the market gets robbed, and Dr. Shawn does not comply with the robber's demands. The robber shoots, and a female customer is injured. The robber is then smashed across the neck by a man with a baseball bat. Dr. Shawn, unharmed, escorts the injured woman and her date back to the hospital. The robber is also brought in as the bat has injured him. The woman's date spots Dr. Shawn and blames Dr. Shawn for the incident. Dr. Neil tells Dr. Shawn to go home after giving his statement to the police, but Dr. Shawn doesn't leave. He wants to help, so Dr. Neil allows him to stay. Dr. Neil returns to his patient with Dr. Kalu, while Dr. Claire and Dr. Lim operate on the shooter. Dr. Claire is uncomfortable helping the shooter, especially after noticing his Nazi tattoo and the disrespectful way in which he spoke to Dr. Lim, having ordered Dr. Claire to leave the operating room and send for a replacement. Dr. Shawn is now in the OR with Dr. Neil and Dr. Kalu, operating on the gunshot victim. Dr. Shawn begins to suture the wounds. The patient is stabilized for now, but the next 24 hours will be critical. Dr. Claire's Nazi patient also survives the surgery, and Dr. Lim puts Dr. Claire on babysitting duties, much to her displeasure. Dr. Shawn has a meeting with the hospital's psychologist, who assesses him but cannot determine the effect of Dr. Shawn's involvement with the gunshot victim's treatment on him. Dr. Neil monitors the gunshot patient and notifies her boyfriend that the possibility of organ failure is high, and she needs someone to sign consent forms. He also mentions that he should contact her parents, but he can't because they had only just met, and she didn't bring any means of identification. Dr. Neil tells him that he doesn't need to be there and will contact social services, but he refuses to go and is permitted to stay. Dr. Claire checks her Nazi patient and discovers he is a drug addict, as he has built a tolerance to pain medication. He needs fentanyl, but Dr. Claire refuses, and he lashes out. Dr. Aaron is not satisfied with the report of the psychologist's session with Dr. Shawn. He's concerned about Dr. Shawn, but the psychologist says that she has had only limited opportunity to observe him. Dr. Claire talks to Dr. Neil about Dr. Lim's actions, but Dr. Neil tells her to do exactly what Dr. Lim tells her to do. Later, Dr. Shawn and Dr. Claire talk about his apple and that morning's incident, and Dr. Claire tells him Leah probably wanted his support, not advice. Dr. Claire is summoned and leaves to check on her Nazi patient. The Nazi has pulled out his IV, annoys her, and undermines her professionalism. Dr. Shawn doesn't want to talk about what happened earlier and returns to check his patient, the gunshot victim, under the watchful gaze of her date. But the date does not trust him. Dr. Shawn discovers the patient's legs have grown big and she needs dialysis. Dr. Neil and Dr. Shawn perform the dialysis, but her organs will continue to fail until her heart stops. Dr. Neil berates the date for antagonizing Dr. Shawn, whom he doesn't even know. Dr. Claire walks into Dr. Lim's OR and confronts her again. Dr. Lim doesn't like her authority and professionalism being undermined, as Dr. Claire would never disrespect or disobey Dr. Neil this way. She orders Dr. Claire back to her Nazi patient. Dr. Aaron catches up with Dr. Shawn and talks to him about what happened. Dr. Shawn, upset, says he's not the cause of the girl's gunshot wound. Dr. Aaron insists Dr. Shawn's actions may have led to the incident, and Dr. Aaron feels he needs to support Dr. Shawn more and help him if need be. The gunshot victim's date opens up that it was his fault that Dr. Shawn's patient got shot. He was trying to ditch her. Dr. Shawn tells him it's not his fault as his patient begins to experience some complications. Dr. Claire's patient has difficulty breathing, and when she removes the bandage from his neck, she discovers his neck is swollen. Dr. Shawn's patient is at end-stage organ failure, and Dr. Neil has to decide between Dr. Shawn's and Dr. Kalu's theories as to why the patient's neck was swollen. He goes with Dr. Kalu's, heading back to the OR. In the OR, the surgeons discovered that Dr. Kalu was right. Dr. Shawn's patient is bleeding internally, but they can't locate the source of the bleed. Dr. Shawn uses his photographic memory to visualize the bullet's path and stops Dr. Neil and Dr. Kalu from cutting her open, believing he has found the bleed. Dr. Kalu pages for Dr. Lim, but she doesn't arrive on time. Dr. Claire has no choice but to perform surgery there and then. She grabs a scalpel, but the extreme swelling obscures the patient's Adam's apple. She makes an incision even when she doesn't know where to cut. As she finishes up, Dr. Lim walks in, taken aback but pleased it went well. She asks for him to be taken to the OR to finish up. In Dr. Neil's OR, Dr. Shawn indicated where to look for the source of the bleeding, and he's correct. The patient is stabilized, and Dr. Neil applauds Dr. Shawn's miraculous ability to locate the bleed. The gunshot patient survives, and her parents have been located. Just as her date leaves, she thanks him and admits she thought he was trying to ditch her. The date looks somewhat relieved and asks for a second chance at another date when she's better. Dr. Claire walks into Dr. Kim's OR and makes a public apology. Dr. Lim accepts Dr. Claire's apology and jokes about the day's victory being a Nazi. When Dr. Shawn is finally home, Leah knocks. He apologizes for not taking her side in the morning, and she gives him an apple as a peace offering before leaving. After a brief moment, Dr. Shawn heads to her apartment and knocks. Leah answers, and he talks about his day. Leah wordlessly hugs him, and although he doesn't hug her back because he doesn't like to be hugged, her embrace relaxes him. That's all for this video. I hope you liked it. Subscribe for more content like this and hit the like button to help us out. Also, leave a comment if you want us to recap your favorite movie. Until next time, take care!